She started in Schlumberger as a field engineer and reached several international executive management positions within her 12-year career path there. Engineer Misfit has a vision in developing Kuwaitis and local talent in oil and gas private sector, and was the founder of the Private Oil Sector Union to become the first female founder and chairman of a union in Kuwait. She is currently a senior engineer at KOC, responsible for different projects and focusing on reaching national production targets. Please welcome Engineer Misfit.
Okay. So shall we pause or shall we start? Did you give them a alarm that we are starting? Hi, how are you? Thank you for being here. Go ahead. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great pleasure for me to be here with you today. Thank you, Kefas, for your invitation and for giving me this opportunity to join the conference and participate with this conference. It is a pleasure to be in a room with such talented, ambitious women whom willing today to share with us their stories and experience. But before we start, I would like to share with you a few messages. Great careers are no longer passed down or handed over. They must be seeded, tended, and grown, and you are the gardener. When women take their success into their own hands, when they take ownership of their achievements, development, and ambition, there is no limit to what they can achieve. I remember a quote here. It says, "There is no force more powerful than a woman determined to rise." Please allow me to share with you a few statistics over the world that confirm the life of women have been improved in the last 2 decades. However, the pace has been slow across regions as well within and among countries. In 2007, statistics shows not enough women joining the oil and gas industry. And the reason behind it, mainly because there is a shortage of women in STEM education program. And the second reason is because of the repetition of the workplace. So let me share with you the statistic from the world. We have 21% in North America women joining the oil and gas industry, 31% in South America, 24% in Europe, 39% in Middle East, 26% in Africa, and 24% in Asia. So statistics shows the proportion for women graduating in the field of science and engineering remain low in poor and rich countries alike. The percentage of women sustaining their career from the entry level to the executive level is still low percentage. It's vary between 15% to 13%. And when the survey takes place asking them why, what kind of obstacles they are facing in their career, the top 3 answers comes as follow: lack of awareness of opportunity, lack of sponsorship, lack of support of senior management and leaders. Last point, with regards the glass ceiling, where women can reach and achieve. Today, the statistics shows less than 4% CEO women around the world. So, regardless all those numbers, we have to believe that we are here today to make the difference. Nothing can dim the light which shines from within. So if you are an early career scientist, if you are a woman in a science looking to improve your leadership skills and climbing in your career, if you are a woman in science who want to help your colleagues to achieve their vision, please join us in this session, the Early Career STEM, where we will have a combined expertise of such lovely 3 successful women to share with us their experience and success story. Thank you.
Thank you, Engineer Neda. Our next speaker is Dr. Jacqueline Gill. Dr. Gill received her PhD from the University of Wisconsin in Madison. Dr. Gill is an assistant professor of paleoecology at the Climate Change Institute and the School of Biology and Ecology at the University of Maine, where she directs the BEAST Lab for investigations on biodiversity and environment across space and time. Her research focuses on ecological responses to climate change and ice age extensions, and has led to several publications in her field. Dr. Gill received her Cooper Award for the Ecological Society of America for her work on the ecological consequences of ice age extensions. She has also received the Ecological Society of America Student Section Award for Academic Excellence for Young Women in Ecology. She co-hosts Warm Regards, a podcast of climate change conversations, and was a founding member of the March of Science, where she worked on diversity inclusion. Please welcome Dr. Gill.
Thank you, first of all, so much to KFAS, AAAS, and the organizers of this conference for this incredible opportunity and the privilege of being able to meet so many wonderful women from around the world. I also have to say it's just been a pleasure to be in a place where my fellow female colleagues have talked about being ambitious as though that were a positive and not a negative, because that's not something that I always hear from my male counterparts. Often ambitious is a bad word, but not in this room and not in this space, and that's really wonderful. So today, just as a little background for this talk, when I was invited to give a presentation in the Early Career Women session, I had so many things that I could talk about. Different, my work with social media, ways of starting a lab, mentorship. There are so many things that are really critical at this career stage. And then my doubts started creeping in. Like, why was I invited? You know, what do I know about being an early career woman in STEM? Why would I be invited to an international conference to talk about these issues? And that's when I realized what I absolutely had to talk about today, which is imposter syndrome. And I'll go into a little bit about what that means later. But it's something that can affect people, women especially, across career stages. And so it just seemed especially fitting that after being invited to a conference, I started doubting myself instead of celebrating that accomplishment. And I thought that that was a really good sign that this is an important issue that needs to be discussed. So I want to start off with a quote. But I am very poorly today, and very stupid, and hate everybody and everything. One lives only to make blunders. So this is something that was written by Charles Darwin 1 year after the publication of On the Origin of Species. So one of the most well-known scientists in the history of science had a really bad day, and he probably had more than one bad day. But just the idea that even someone so successful can think of themselves as stupid and as a poor scholar, someone who just lives to make blunders, someone who is constantly misstepping or making mistakes. And when I first read this, it really hit home, because as an early career scientist, I had often felt like I was having days like Darwin's day here. So I want to ask you all, how many of you have ever felt like a fraud in your workplace? Okay, we've got hands already. I haven't even started. All right. Raise your hand if you've ever thought that you got a job, a grant, or an award because of luck or charm rather than skill? Okay. How many of you have ever felt like your peers are smarter than you, more confident, or more together? How many of you have felt like you didn't belong in your position because you're not good enough, and so you had to work harder to keep up with everyone else? Okay. And how many of you have been afraid that you'll reveal your inadequacies by saying or doing the wrong thing, that someone will find out that you don't belong where you are? Okay, so I think most of you have raised your hands. For those of you who didn't, I really want to talk to you and figure out what your secret is. Yeah. So this feeling has a name. It's called imposter syndrome, which is defined as the inability to internalize your accomplishments and also a persistent fear of being exposed as a fraud. And this term was coined by a couple of psychologists in 1978 who originally worked on women. They thought that this was a phenomenon that was felt mostly by women, although subsequent research has found that men actually feel this as well. And this idea of not being able to internalize your accomplishments is something I think we can all relate to, and this comic, I think, highlights it really well. We often get praise. Think about, for those of you who teach in academia, if you get teaching evaluations or comments from your students at the end of the semester, oftentimes I'll go through pages of students saying things like, Professor Gill was so passionate and really got me excited about this topic. Professor Gill always made lectures accessible. Professor Gill helped me understand what I want to do with my career. Professor Gill made biology interesting. And then there's one comment, Professor Gill sucks. And that's the one that I think about for like months later, right? One comment out of 50 is the one that sticks in your head. And all of the other wonderful, positive, substantial comments are the ones that you just forget, right? Those are never the ones that we internalize. It's always the negative. And so that voice in your head can sometimes provide the negative as well. So this idea of imposter syndrome, it's very common. Something like 70% of people in the world have felt like an imposter at some point in their lives, which was a really shocking statistic to me. The problem is, though, this feeling often goes unrecognized, which means nothing is done about it, and then it just sort of persists. And the research on this topic suggests that there are certain traits that are felt or that might predict imposter syndrome. It tends to be felt by women, especially high-achieving women, and if you grew up in a family with a lot of expectations or pressure to be successful, then you're more likely to feel like you're not good enough. And if you're an underrepresented minority of any kind, you're more likely to feel like an imposter, especially if in your workplace, you find that the people that surround you don't look like you, right? So if you're a person of color, a person with a disability, as many of these axes that you can imagine in terms of our identities, as you start adding them up, you're more and more likely to feel like an imposter. Interestingly, though, there's another common trait, which is that people embarking on new endeavors, which means that this is an especially important thing to talk about for early career women in STEM, right? Or anyone in early career. Grad students, postdocs, new faculty, etc. When you're starting off something from the beginning, it's easy to feel like you don't belong because you're still learning. I mean, that's if you were done, you would be a full professor, not an assistant professor. That's how it works. So how do you notice the signs that you're feeling this? I think that this is really key. If we know that most of us are going to feel this way at some point or other, it's really important to be able to distinguish the unhealthy patterns that we're exhibiting and tell the difference between when we're feeling imposter syndrome and when we're just giving ourselves good feedback, right? So we all have things we can learn, and acknowledging that we have skills that we need to develop or things that we could beef up in terms of our strengths, that's actually, for me, a very helpful way of distinguishing between imposter syndrome and some sort of deficit, right? I know that there are things I need to be better at, but I also need to know when I'm actually good at something. So the signs of imposter syndrome might be something like perfectionism to a fault, right? If your perfectionism is keeping you from finishing a task, overworking to a fault. I mean, we all have times where we're busy or we need to cram for a deadline or something like that. But if you're persistently feeling like you need to work more and harder than everyone around you, you might actually be compensating for feelings of imposter syndrome rather than some actual deficit in your skills. Difficulty accepting praise is another sign, right? And so if someone tells you, that was a really great presentation, or I really loved your paper, or congratulations on that grant, and you find yourself uncomfortable or embarrassed, or like you're making excuses for yourself, like, so for example, my master's thesis was published in Science. And the reason I'm feeling really uncomfortable saying that, right, because we're not supposed to talk about ourselves in a positive way. But I'm telling this story because when I was congratulated for that publication, the first thing I would always say is, I just got really lucky. I had great reviewers. It's like, that's not, that's not the reason why, you had a high impact paper, right? The reason was, was your work, right? Your ideas, right? Sometimes we do get bad reviewers, but, we can't chalk up our successes to good reviewers. So, work on your ability to accept praise. Don't undermine your own achievements, right? Don't sell yourself short. Don't say that you're not as good as someone else. Classically, my dad, I'd bring home an A- on a report card, and he would say, "Well, how come it's not an A? When you bring back an A, that's when I'll get excited," right? So an A- might be an achievement. Constant feelings of anxiety and self-doubt that might start to influence your ability to function at work. If you start to find that you're missing deadlines or getting behind because you're really struggling. And comparing yourself to others, right? If you're constantly finding yourself unable to be happy with where you are in your career because maybe one of your colleagues has done more or published an extra paper than you or got an award that you didn't. That constant comparison can be really unhealthy. So these are some of the common symptoms of imposter syndrome. And so kind of look out for these as red flags. And just note that when you start to feel these things, you need to check in with yourself and maybe find a good mentor or a colleague who can remind you that you are an accomplished scientist under your own merits. So a colleague of mine actually posed this question on Twitter: when do you feel imposter syndrome? Which is, I think, really useful because it gives you a sense of when you can look out for those kinds of feelings, the periods in your life or in your career where those feelings might start to arise. And what I think is really interesting, you don't have to read all of these tweets, but I highlighted some of the words. Some of them are negative scenarios, like I'm feeling behind on my work, or a paper's been rejected, or I've just started out as a grad student, so I don't really know a lot. But notice that there are also a lot of examples where people felt like imposters when they were successful. I was happy for 2 hours after I got my paper accepted, and then I started to doubt myself, right? Or when I'm giving a talk and there are people I really respect in the room, or I've just submitted a paper, or someone compliments me on my science, right? So even positive scenarios might be invitations for us to feel like we don't belong or like we haven't earned our accomplishments. And that's a problem. And why is that a problem? Why should we care? If 70% of the world feels this way at times, why shouldn't we just accept that this is normal and move on? Well, I actually think that imposter syndrome hurts us in big ways and small ways. And it specifically hurts us in our quest to improve diversity in science and technology and engineering. First of all, it prevents us as women from seeking opportunities. If you're selling yourself short all the time, you're not applying for that grant. You're not submitting a paper to a high-impact journal. You're not putting yourself up for a prestigious award. We know there's extensive research that shows that, at least in the United States, women tend to put themselves up for tenure later. They take longer because they don't feel confident, right? They feel like they need to have a bigger body of work, or they don't put themselves up for full professor, right? And so you're basically demoting yourself or not promoting yourself because you feel like you're inadequate. And so that's actually got, major repercussions for your own career. It also undermines our health and well-being because nobody wants to feel like that all the time, right? We want to be able to celebrate our successes. We don't want our baseline emotion to be anxiety and depression. And it affects our work, right? So if I'm constantly critiquing myself to the point where I can't get a paper out the door, then that's a problem. I'm not meeting my own goals in terms of my career. And I'm really guilty of this myself. There's a paper that I have been working on for 4 years that was supposed to come out from my postdoc, and we want to send it to a high-impact journal. And I, having had that earlier success at the journal Science, I'm now terrified of getting rejected from Science, right? Like, what if I was a one-hit wonder as a master's student and my career is over? What if, and the longer this paper goes on without me submitting it, the longer the more it's built up, right? Now it really has to get into Science. Are there any Science editors in the room, actually? I shouldn't probably say this, right? But, so I just feel like I'm going to really let everybody down if it doesn't happen this time. And so now 4 years have gone by, and I'm in danger of getting scooped because I'm sitting on a paper that is basically done, that I'm just sort of tweaking here and there just to make sure it's perfect before I submit it. And it will never be perfect. Perfect is the enemy of good, right? You will never achieve perfect. So at that point, that paper probably could have been helpful for my year 3 review if I'd gotten it accepted anywhere, And also, as I said, all of these things where we're sort of undermining ourselves and each other contributes to the lack of diversity in STEM, at all levels of the pipeline. All right, so I don't like to just diagnose problems. I like to talk about solutions. And so I have spent a lot of time myself thinking about this issue, and a lot of my colleagues, and here are the sorts of things that we've come up with as a community that are basically good strategies that you can apply when you start to feel those feelings of an imposter creep in. So, and I'm so grateful that Dr. Binstead mentioned that it's not about faking it till you make it, because you are not faking it. You are already making it where you are. So that's why I like this little bird who's pulling strips of paper to give himself feathers. He's already got feathers. He's doing fine. First of all, inventory your accomplishments and own them, right? Keep a list. Many of you have to do this anyway to update your CV. I actually have something called a happy folder in my email. This can be a physical folder, it can be an email folder. Anytime someone sends you a compliment or you accomplish something, put it in the folder. And then when you're having those moments of self-doubt, pull out that CV, pull out that folder, look at that list of accomplishments on your little notepad, and remind yourself, yes, you've actually done a lot of great things and you were respected by your peers. This is one of my personal favorites. Mentor others. Make that a part of your strategy, because nothing tells you how much you've learned like having to teach someone else, right? Having to give advice to someone else is a great reminder of how far you've come. So when I was in graduate school, I was like 3 years into a PhD, so I'd been in school for like 5 to 6 years already before I felt like I knew anything. And the only thing that made me realize what I'd learned was sitting down and teaching an undergrad how to do it. And then I was like, oh, I couldn't teach them if I didn't actually know this. Cultivate strong networks. So it's really important that you have a great network of scientists to help you and to reinforce you, especially when things get tough. And if you feel like you're in an institution where you can't do this on your own, then because you just don't have a lot of people around you, then I highly recommend going to social media, places like Twitter, secret Facebook groups, Slack channels, things like that, where you can have those conversations with people you meet at conferences like this one, right? And that can be really powerful. So whenever I'm having a really rough time, I reach out to my mentor network. And these are usually peers. Celebrate your achievements. Don't be afraid to take a moment and be happy for yourself and your colleagues when one of you submits a paper. or gets a grant or something like that. Don't just let it pass through in the rush of your busyness, right? Take a moment and actually own what you've done in a positive and public way. It can be very therapeutic. I also recommend things like therapy and self-care to help break that cycle of imposter syndrome. Oftentimes it's tied up with feelings of anxiety and depression. Things like cognitive behavior therapy can help you recognize that imposter syndrome loop and stop it before it starts. And just taking care of yourself is really a good thing to do in general. Have your outside hobbies, have things that validate you. It's also really important to learn to recognize imposter syndrome in others. If you're not feeling it at the moment, knowing when your students, your mentees, your colleagues are feeling like an imposter, and then you can let them know, no, actually, what you just said is wrong. You weren't lucky. You're talented, right? You're skilled. You did this. I also want to warn you that imposter syndrome, you can fight it, and sometimes it goes away, but it can also come back. So I famously to myself, wrote a blog post when I was a PhD student titled, "How I Cured My Imposter Syndrome." And now, having then done a postdoc and now as an assistant professor, I still feel like an imposter. I didn't really cure it, right? It recurs from time to time. And recognizing that can help you identify when you're feeling like an imposter versus when you just are feeling badly about yourself, right? So I have to remind myself, oh yes, just because I got over it as a PhD student doesn't mean it didn't come back. And so now I can actually recognize that, no, I need to be on the lookout for those feelings. It's also important to create a climate where everyone thrives. So for those of you who don't feel like an imposter, for those of you who are in positions of power at your institutions, for those of you who are committed to improving diversity in STEM, you can play a role in fighting this as well. Honor the accomplishments of your students, your colleagues, your mentees. Shut down negative comments when you hear them. Things like, oh, she only got that job because she's a woman. Or, oh, you must have been lucky. It must be so lucky to get a good grant reviewer, right? When you hear other people saying those things about your colleagues or even yourself, put an end to it, right? Just cut it off, right? You can be polite, but that should not fly. Nominate women for awards. We are disproportionately underrepresented in all kinds of awards and achievements. And for that to be overcome, we have to be nominated. And so I try to make it a goal to try to nominate a woman for an award who deserves it once a year, right, for some major award or other. And also credit women for their ideas. Right? So we can often feel like our accomplishments aren't being recognized because they're literally not being recognized, right? It's not just our inability to internalize our accomplishments, it's that society and our colleagues and our infrastructure is telling us that we haven't achieved anything, even though we have. So if you're in a position to do any of these things, make it a personal goal to try to work towards making your workplace inclusive for everyone. So with that, I thank you, and I hope you all combat your imposter syndrome.
Thank you, Dr. Gall. Our next speaker is Dr. Emily Levisk. Dr. Levisk is an assistant professor of astronomy at the University of Washington. She spent 5 years as an Einstein Fellow and a Hubble Fellow at the University of Colorado in Boulder before moving to the University of Washington. Her research is focused on improving the overall understanding of massive stars that are at least 10 times as massive as the Sun. Dr. Levisk is a 2017 Alfred P. Sloan Research Fellow in Physics and won the 2014 Annie Jump Carter Prize for the American Astronomical Society, as well as the 2012 Robert J. Trumpler Award for the Astronomical Society of the Pacific for her research on massive. Dr. Levisk most recently authored 2 books, Astrophysics: A Red Supergiant, a professional textbook, Understanding Stellar Evolution, and a graduate textbook. Please welcome Dr. Levisk.
All right, I want to start, like the other speakers, by saying thank you so much for inviting me to be here. This is incredibly humbling company to be in, and I've so enjoyed hearing from our other speakers and enjoying conversations with the other participants over the past 2 days. I'm looking forward to more of it tomorrow. So I was asked to speak as an early career scientist to talk about my own background, to talk about my journey to becoming a professional scientist. And I figure I'll start by mentioning again the research that I actually do. So my research is focused on the properties and evolution of massive stars. These are stars that are at least 10 times as massive as our sun. They live very short lives for stars, only about 10 million years. And a star like this ends its life as an explosive supernova and then forms something like a neutron star or a black hole. So what I'm curious about are the stages that immediately precede that explosion, figuring out what happens to the star at the end of its life to turn it into something like a black hole. The image that I have on the screen right now is of a star named V838 Mon. We don't pick very fun names in astronomy sometimes. But this is a cold star that underwent an outburst about 15 years ago. And it was observed by the Hubble Space Telescope in real time. The image is not an animation or an artist simulation. These are real photographs from Hubble that have been knitted together into a movie showing light propagating out from this star and illuminating material around it. It's one of my favorite graphics about massive stars, and I come by this honestly because I've been a fan of the Hubble Space Telescope for a very long time. This is me when I was 6 years old in 1990 when the Hubble Space Telescope launched, wearing my little Hubble t-shirt that I really wish that I still had. So you can see that from an early age, I was fortunate enough to receive a lot of encouragement in becoming a scientist. And to talk about that journey, I feel like I first need to put into context the current state of US astronomy and what our professional climate is like. This is a plot from the American Institute of Physics. It's showing the astronomy PhDs awarded since 1983. So the shaded blue area is the total number of PhDs awarded. The red line is the number of PhDs awarded to men, and the green line is PhDs awarded to women. You can see that the green line has climbed and the overall percentage has gone up. It's worth noting that astronomy, related to some of the other physical sciences, like physics as a whole, is not faring too badly, relatively, when it comes to gender equity. In 2014, physics faculty were 16% women in the US, but astronomy faculty were 20%. The numbers get smaller when you look at people who have achieved the rank of full professor. 10% of full professors in physics were women, and 15% of full professors in astronomy were women. We tend to get lumped in with physics, so finding individual numbers like this is difficult, but the representation in astronomy has been improving with time. In the years from 2010 to 2012, 38% of bachelor's degrees and 35% of PhDs in astronomy were earned by women. So at the start of what we refer to sometimes as the pipeline, we have over a third women participating in astronomy and entering the system by earning degrees. We are also seeing women in astronomy being recognized with awards. Women are very active and well-respected members of the field. The American Astronomical Society awards a number of research prizes, and there are national and international science prizes that are going to women astronomers. This is just a small sampling of women who have won prizes for astronomy research, theoretical work, observational work, work like building telescope instruments. Two of these women are TED Fellows who get an international platform to talk about science and innovation. There's also an award given by the American Astronomical Society that I was fortunate enough to win a few years ago in honor of Annie Jump Cannon. She was an astronomer at Harvard at the turn of the 20th century, and she created the system of classifying stars that we still use literally every day today. I taught that system in my class last week. So 100 years later, this is still the canonical, literally, system for classifying stars. What we're also starting to see, which is very encouraging, is women in leadership and senior positions within the field. These pictures are just from my immediate professional sphere. The chair of my department right now at the University of Washington is a woman, Julianne Del Canton. Our divisional dean of natural sciences is Suzanne Hawley, another woman astronomer. And both the past president, and the current president of the American Astronomical Society are women. So it's wonderful to see women ascending to senior and leader level positions in the field. At the same time, it's not necessarily a perfect or idealized field, far from it. We still run into a number of problems. One thing that we see in astronomy is a classic example of what we call the leaky pipeline. This is the idea that a large number of junior women will enter a field, but you see their numbers dwindle as you move from PhDs to postdocs to early career faculty to late career faculty. The diagram on the lower right is showing the percent women at the rank of assistant professor, associate professor, and full professor over the course of 11 years. And you would expect that full professor number to rise much more than it has in that period of time. So we are losing women along the way. It's also a very small and very competitive field. So women leaving because it's simply too exhausting to try and get a faculty job, or because of other pressures, are disproportionately felt because our numbers are already so few. We've also encountered in the past few years a number of sexual harassment cases in astronomy that have actually wound up making the national news in the United States at institutions like the University of California at Berkeley, at MIT, where I was a student, at Caltech. And this has actually led to some interesting questions where people ask, well, what's wrong with astronomy? Why is sexual harassment so prevalent there? And I would argue that this is maybe weirdly a good thing, because at least we are talking about it. The harassment has been happening for years, and at least now it's being published and it's in the open. And I would guess that there are some other fields combating similar issues, and hopefully by shedding some light on it, we'll start to improve the situation. There's also some more insidious sources of bias. One of the big resources that we have available to us in astronomy is access to a telescope. To get time on a telescope, you write a proposal, much like you write a grant proposal in other fields. The Hubble Space Telescope is an extremely competitive place to get observing time. You have about a 20% success rate. And a few years ago, a group did a study and realized that Hubble Space Telescope proposals by women are less likely to be successful. This is a plot of success rates for Hubble proposals over a 10-year period. The male success rate was 23.5%, and the female success rate was only 18%. Our names are on the fronts of the proposals. The field is so small that you can practically guess who wrote a proposal, even if your name isn't on it. And they were finding that panels consisting of men and women were ranking women's proposals more poorly. So these are all issues that we're still facing and trying to combat in the field. And that's the context that I wanted to lay for my own experience of becoming an astronomer. So when I was asked to speak on this, I was initially really worried that I would have absolutely nothing to say. I think one of the prompts that we got was talk about how gender and how your experience as a woman has affected your experience. And I have the unusual perspective of feeling like my gender has not particularly held me back. We were told yesterday to have fun, and I've had a great deal of fun in my career. This is me standing in front of the Keck 10-meter telescopes at the top of Mauna Kea. This was the mountain in the background of the photo that Kim showed when she was talking about her research on Mauna Loa. I've had a good support system, and I've had a lot of wonderful opportunities. So in preparing this talk, what I tried to do was look back and think about what helped me, what contributed to my having a positive experience, and what can I learn from that and turn around to try and pass on to others. To start with this, I actually wanted to show this photo, and this is a photo that I have sitting next to my desk in my office. And this is not a famous woman scientist, but I consider her an extremely accomplished woman with scientific interests. This is my grandmother, Cecile Cabana. She had to drop out of school at the age of 13 and go to work in a textile factory to help support her family. Many years later, she went back to school while raising 5 children. She earned her high school equivalency degree and then earned a nursing degree. So that's her on the left receiving her nursing degree. Because of this, she and everyone else in my family had an extremely positive view of the value of education, and it was a view that came very independent of gender. So this very much informed how I grew up when I was little. I think my family hoped that by the time I grew up, we would be in this sort of post-gender utopia that was described yesterday morning, where gender was an afterthought. And that was very much how they treated me. I was never told that I couldn't do science because I was a girl. I was never told, oh, good for you, you like science even though you're a girl. My gender simply wasn't brought up in the context of my interests. I was free to put on a pink sundress and big safety goggles and help my dad in his workshop. This was just part of being a kid, not part of being a girl. The beloved Hubble t-shirt was another element of this. My interest in science was encouraged. By the time I was in high school, I was entering science competitions following in the footsteps of my older brother. This is a photo of me building something for one of my science projects, and when I showed this picture in a competition, I had a judge ask me if it was a picture of my brother. And I said, no, that's me. My parents taught me how to use power tools, and they're encouraging me to do this. But thanks to a supportive father, mother, brother, extended family, I grew up thinking that science was simply a natural thing for me to do. I was a scientist before I was a woman, and these two things weren't presented as being in conflict. I went to college at MIT, and I think a lot of people are sometimes wondering if MIT was a difficult place to be as a woman. I found it absolutely fantastic. When I was an undergraduate there, MIT was 50-50 men and women, something that's still true now. And now, for the first time, I was around other women like me who were willing to, in this picture, put on big yellow raincoats and gloves and the safety goggles again and make ice cream using liquid nitrogen. So being a woman who was enthusiastic about science now had gotten me a bunch of wonderful peers that I could share those interests with. This continued again at the Institute for Astronomy at the University of Hawaii. We heard from Shadia yesterday, who was one of a number of women faculty that I was fortunate enough to know while I was there. And again, I received a lot of support from the women and the men in that department that enabled me to continue in my career. So I got a chance to experience this idea that we heard of yesterday, where gender was not emphasized, where gender was an afterthought, and it was very much a product of the people that I had around me and the people that I had supporting my career. I was also thinking about role models and the importance of role models in my life. I've had people ask me, well, did you need or did you miss having women role models? The public profile of women astronomers is still not very strong, and I was asked if that had been a problem. And my initial thought was, well, no, because I didn't notice this. This surely didn't matter to me when I was a kid. My big role models were the Apollo astronauts. I wanted to be an Apollo astronaut. And it didn't matter that the Apollo program had ended a decade before I was born, or that the Apollo astronauts were all men. That seemed like a really cool job. When I thought about it more, though, I could pinpoint examples where seeing women as scientists really made a difference. Like any good 90s kid in the US, I grew up watching movies, and I was thinking of movies like these, who all included women scientists, very matter-of-factly doing their jobs, and typically having much more dramatic experiences than we do, but still appearing on the screen as a very normal part of the science climate. I also remember a very specific instance from when I was about 9 years old. This picture is a group of people at the Space Telescope Science Institute. It's the headquarters for the Hubble Space Telescope. They are all crowded around one computer monitor, waiting for data to arrive, observing Jupiter. This was when the Schumacher-Levy 9 comet struck Jupiter. This was something that had been predicted for a while ahead of time, but nobody was really sure what this impact would look like, if we would be able to see the signs of the comet hitting Jupiter, and if the data would be interesting. And when the data first came in from Hubble, this is what they saw. Those brown scars, those dots across the bottom of Jupiter, you see them right on the sort of lower right of the planet, are these massive scars from the comet striking the planet. And when the news was covering this, they showed a video clip of all of those people crowded around the computer and yelling and screaming and cheering and laughing with each other. And I remember this image so well. The woman in the center of that image is Heidi Hammel. At the time, I didn't know that. I just saw a woman with big glasses like me, wearing a t-shirt like me, surrounded by other scientists who were also as excited as she was about what they were seeing. And that image stuck in my head immensely. And for years, I was thinking about that, going, I want to be one of those people. I want to be a part of this. And by seeing her there and seeing other women there, I had no doubt that I could be. These same women are currently very valuable role models to me. I got a lot of encouragement from men and women as I was a student in astronomy, as I was a young PhD student. A lot of people saying, oh, good for you, we're so glad that you're still in astronomy. And by then I was starting to hear, we're so glad you're an astronomer even though you're a girl. And that encouragement tends to die down when you go from being a student to being their peer, to sitting across a table from them and arguing with them, to perhaps being in charge of them. So seeing women who are in those positions has been very encouraging and has helped to convince me that that's a position that I could pursue someday should I want to. The last thing that I considered was the idea of identifying bias and barriers that I have encountered. Nobody ever stood in front of me and told me I couldn't do something or I couldn't be an astronomer because I was a woman. The issues that I faced were a little bit more subtle. There's an exam called the Physics Graduate Record Exam that you have to take in order to be accepted to an astronomy graduate program. Despite having a good physics education and knowing that I was a good researcher, I had an immense amount of difficulty with this exam, and it really scared me into thinking that maybe I wasn't cut out to be an astronomer. I also got back paper reviews sometimes with reviewers saying things like, are you sure you pointed the telescope in the right place? Or can you prove to me that you really know how to measure errors? Skepticism that I'm not sure I would have faced if I had been a male author. And I've gotten Hubble Space Telescope reviews back on proposals that I thought were strong, that were extremely negative. These sorts of issues are the hardest things for me to combat. Trying to combat this sort of unconscious bias is like trying to grab a hold of smoke. You're always able to convince yourself that it's not sexism. We just heard about imposter syndrome. You can easily say, well, maybe that paper wasn't that good. Maybe I didn't point the telescope in the right place. Maybe that proposal really was bad. And it's very hard to decide that it is an issue of sexism and to even identify the problem, let alone figure out how to combat it. So these are the three main issues that I've touched upon, and in the short time I have remaining, I do want to talk a little bit about how I'm considering these now. I'm now fortunate enough to be a professor and to have people that I'm mentoring, and what I'm hoping is that we can address all of these things and give positive experiences to the people who are now coming up after us. For one, this idea of your personal gender experience. It's always hard when you're highlighted as an outlier and when life is made difficult for you in little ways because of your gender. And any attempt to try and fix this helps with this experience. It ranges from little things like having ladies' rooms, like the converted ladies' room that we have here, having the ability to live and work comfortably in your job, having examples in class, in physics classes that don't all star men. This can range to complicated things like taking an academic department, that's our department at the University of Washington, and making sure that your faculty is representative of your students and that the students you're giving opportunities to are representative of the people who are interested. The question of role models is also interesting. We want to get women into the pipeline at the beginning, and probably our two most famous science communicators in the US are both astronomers, Carl Sagan and Neil deGrasse Tyson. What we do not yet have is a very high-profile woman science communicator. If you stop the average American on the street and ask them to name a living woman scientist, a shocking number of them can't do it. They say Marie Curie, and you've asked them to name a living woman scientist. So what my hope is that the next science communicator could be a woman. There was a commercial that was aired in the United States by General Electric not too long ago that posed this imaginary question of what would happen if we treated scientists like rock stars. And the example they chose was Millie Dresselhaus. And they imagined a world in which this amazingly accomplished woman scientist was on the cover of Vogue, and little girls were dressing up like her for Halloween, and there were dolls that looked like her, and her research was being breathlessly reported in Times Square. I think this is a good goal to aim for little boys and little girls, to see scientists celebrated in the same way that we celebrate athletes, and trying to achieve gender parity along the way would only help everybody. And then finally, this question of identifying bias and barriers. I had mentioned that exam that I had so much trouble with when I was trying to get into graduate school. Most standardized tests actually have a very strong gender bias and a very strong racial bias. A group of us studied this exam among successful astronomers. That's what the plot on the right is. And we found that among people who had already succeeded in astronomy, their physics GRE scores varied wildly. Women had much lower physics graduate record exam scores than men, and these were all very successful people. We presented this research, and it's actually led to astronomy departments in the United States starting to drop this exam as an admissions requirement. The University of Washington no longer requires it, Harvard recently dropped it, and more schools are following suit. So our hope is that this takes down a barrier that has existed that is keeping women out of astronomy programs. So on that note, I'll leave these last comments up along with some questions that I'm posing to help us think about how we can answer these issues and how we can improve things. And I want to thank you so much again for this invitation and this opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Levies. Our next speaker is Dr. Noura Ftais. Dr. Noura holds a PhD in informatics from the University of Sussex. Dr. Ftais is the director of Kenti Center for Computing Research at Qatar University. She is also an assistant professor at the Department of Computer Science and Engineering in Qatar University. She is a member of the first batch of Qatar Leadership Center. She is currently holding various professional positions, including Vice Chair of IEEE's Qatar Section and Qatar Ambassador of Women in Data Science at Stanford University. Dr. Noura was the first woman to chair the Faculty of Senate of Qatar University. Please welcome Dr. Noura.
السلام عليكم. بداية أشكر كفاس for the invitation. Thank you very much. I'm very honored to be here with all these women and leaders, so thank you very much. I will start this speech with a quote that I believe in, and I think this quote represents all of us today, because as women, we committed to our principles and values. We do not live on the margins of life. We do not go wandering without a vision. We do not follow or wait for guidance from anyone. So this is really what I think of all of you today. So His Highness Sheikh Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani is inspiring us as Qatari people, and thus I'm so happy to cite this quote today. In the following slides, I will talk about women education and workforce in the MENA region. So for the women education, according to the statistics from Wikigender, in most Arab states, there are more women than men pursuing university degrees. In Qatar, Kuwait, and United Arab Emirates, nearly 2/3 of all university graduates are women, which is a higher rate of enrollment than in the Western countries. However, women make up less than half the students in engineering, production, and construction, which are the STEM areas. Even women, only 43% who graduate from STEM are significantly less likely than men to continue in these areas. What about the workforce? So according to the World Bank, Labor force participation for women in Qatar is roughly 51%, which is higher than the world average and is the highest rate in the Arab world. And according to the recent survey conducted by Bait.com, 59% of women in the workforce feel that they are treated fairly and receive equal opportunity to their male counterparts. But over 40% feel that they stand a lower chance of getting promoted in their work than their male counterparts. So, being an early career woman means that when preparing plans, difficult decisions must be taken. So, family responsibility, which are the future constraints that shapes the career choices. Women have different roles within their families, so they are employee, daughter, sister, wife, mother, friend, etc. All of these roles require efforts which could be very hard for an early career woman, and thus they need to get support to survive and flourish in the work field. So they need really a role model who have the same roles. So whenever they feel desperate, they will go back and look at the career of the role model. However, if we do a search for the, for example, computer scientist, what we will see this in Google. So you can see for the 3 rows here, only one woman who's really working as a computer scientist. And the 3rd row, there is one woman, however, she's helping her male colleague. So this is if you search for computer scientist. The other images will be cartoon-like, and some of them are the icing on the cake, some of the photos. However, as women, we really need computer scientist role models to look up to, but there's also an issue of having women in the workforce. And if we try to search for the female computer scientist role model, this is what we'll get. Barbie. Yeah, so while the increasing number of women are starting to prefer STEM-related careers, the lack of female leaders and role models in STEM area are struck. In fact, in the 2017 ranking of 100 of the world's most influential Arab women have only 9 women from STEM-related careers. So why is this? According to the statistics from UNESCO, the gender, I can't really see this very clear. So for the gender discrepancy and this gender segregation can be attributed to the student attitude, motivation, and interest rather than differences in ability. Lack of the role model of women leading successful careers in STEM area. Women's career choices are more shaped by their future constraints they anticipate as family responsibility. A survey conducted in the US showed that men are more likely, which is 14-1, to portray the roles of computer scientists and engineering movies. So most of the movies, if we try to remember, there is a man and perhaps a female helping him. So what can we do? Highlight the role of successful female leaders and emphasize on role models in STEM areas. So in Qatar, for example, I'm using Qatar because I'm from Qatar and this is the only resource I could really get the data from. So in Qatar, for example, we have Sheikh Hamouza as a role model, but Sheikh Hamouza is not from STEM area. So having a role model is good. So ladies can, whenever they have some difficulties, they can see what the role model has done and they can really have the support and the power from that. But what about the STEM areas? Where's the role models for the STEM areas? One more thing, we need really to have a plan. Perhaps we need to replan or replan, because as ladies, sometimes we have constraints and we have to change the priority from time to time, depend on other constraints. So, having a community for supporting early career women is important to help in lifting these restrictions, creating opportunities and reflecting the important role of women in communities. Not only we as women lack the role model in our area, but also the issue of having sufficient amount of women in that area. I'm talking about the country level here. So, we need to maintain the current interest of young graduates entering that field, and also we need, as I mentioned before, plan, replan, and replan. And life is not statistic, but we always have these variables that enforce us to change the plans, however, not giving up the dream. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for your great, interested, inspiration presentation. I think we get everybody attention, at least the people who's attending our session. And I'm sure that it's wake up also your curiosity. Any question for the presenters? Sure.
Ladies, you know, I look at you and I'm saying, I'm feeling old at this point. But with the imposter syndrome, it's true. I went through it in my career, and it was stronger when you have more male, environment. Okay, they try to put you down. I was criticized for the way I dress. And it's in the States, okay? I'm not even talking about Kuwait. I was told that, this is not for you. This is, you're taking a man's position, and all that and more. I'll just share with you something, you get over it with time, but the only thing that actually made sense to me is that I got to a point that nobody's opinion matters anymore. Okay, I know who I am, and I'm very confident of what I'm doing. So, siblings' opinion, parents' opinion, the society opinion, doesn't matter at all. You're convinced on the inside you're doing the right thing, just keep doing it. Actually, at CAFAS, they call me Miss Nike, because I truly, truly just say, just do it. Nothing should hold you back. So kudos for you, especially in astronomy, because I know that's a tough field, really. But all of you, just be strong and know that we've been there before you, but we got over it, so you will too. And good luck with everything you do. Not luck, you're doing the best, and we're very proud of you.
Thank you. Any more comments or questions? Yeah, we have one here. Oh, two.
Well, I would like to start by thanking all of the speakers. I'm Nada Al-Masri, from assistant professor in MIS or computer science, both, and Gulf University for Science and Technology here in Kuwait. Now, first of all, I want to talk about the comment of Professor Levesque. When you said I wasn't aware about the conflict between being a woman and going to science field, that seems so true. If we just don't focus on ourselves as being women and we have to face difficulties, if we just think, okay, well, we're just a human being, let's focus on our interests and forget about what the society says about you being women, you have to be always slowed down, someone was going to slow you down. We just focus about interest and we forget about, you didn't even know about that difference because you grow in an environment that did not really make you feel about that difference. You were so lucky. But then after a few years you realized, oh my God, something is happening and that's because that I am a woman. Maybe it's stronger here in Middle East region and Arab region, even in Gulf region, even stronger. It is stronger. I've been there. I've been in France and in Canada. I know it's women there also suffer the same difficulties as here. Maybe here it's a bit stronger yet. So what I want to say, is there any point for all of the speakers? Is there any point in your career that you try to forget about yourself being a woman and just focus on your interests? Did that, I mean, if you tried this, did that at all help you, or at some point always there's someone who would keep reminding you, you're a woman? How did it happen for you?
I'm happy to start. So first of all, I think that, to be clear, I think my parents, my mother especially, wanted me to know that there were people out there who would tell me I couldn't do things because I was a woman, and she wanted me to know that they were wrong. But I didn't think she wanted me to be surprised, and I don't think the solution is to pretend that everything is fine and pretend that nobody's going to care that you're a woman. And it's an attitude that you get in the US in an unproductive way, that you'll talk to a lot of men who will be like, sexism? Haven't we fixed that by now? I thought we fixed that. It's fine now, right? Which is not a helpful attitude at all. But I do try to, and not really try to, I do think of myself as a scientist first, and somebody who plays the violin second, and somebody who likes to cook third, and woman is on the list, but not at the top. I think that where it really gets difficult is when I run into situations where I feel like I may have been treated unfairly with a negative paper review, and nobody says to me, that was because you're a woman. I have to wonder it and go, is that an example of what happened? And that's where it does become a problem, and where I try to put it out of my mind, but I also wonder if I should. Is this a point where I should stand up and argue? Is this a big enough problem that we need to combat it? So that's where I find most of the conflict now, is those situations where it's unclear, but it could be a product of sexism.
Thank you. Would you like to comment, Victor?
So I often find myself in this position where I would like to just stop being a woman scientist and be a scientist. Often that feeling starts to creep in when I get behind on my research, or when I start to feel like I'm getting more acknowledgement for being a woman who does diversity work, or a woman who does communication, science communication, than for my science itself. When I start to feel like I'm getting more speaking invitations to talk about diversity than paleoecology, and then I start to become anxious that my science is falling behind. And sometimes, the most radical thing we can do as women scientists is to be excellent and just to be strong scientists. We don't always have that luxury, because sometimes things happen to us. I'll be focusing on my science, and it's always sort of a left field experience where I'll get a grant review that says I'm competent and should not have been put on the grant because they just wanted to check the diversity box or something like that, right? And so then it's like those are the things that often remind me, and I would like to stop having those experiences so that I could focus more on being a scientist. But I do worry, especially in fields or places where women are still very underrepresented, there's often an expectation that if you're a woman scientist, you'll also talk about gender diversity issues. You have to talk about these issues. And I think that not everyone wants to, and that's fine. And I just would like to get to a place where we can just be excellent scientists. But I don't think we're there yet, and I keep getting reminders. But those reminders are always external, right? They're always someone else reminding me that I'm a woman scientist.
Thank you. Thank you for the answer. I think we have a question here or a comment, please.
Okay, you just touched on a nerve, you know, when exposing and really talking about the hidden issues that people don't talk about while you are pursuing the career. And it doesn't appear when you are a graduate student. Everybody is happy with your performance and so on. You're focusing on one topic, it's a team and so on. But once you hit the workplace, it's a different story. And then wait until you become in decision making. And that is the real story, because then it's a power thing, it becomes ugly, and the negative comments are more than the positive comments. If you do the same thing as a male colleague, he's not criticized, you are criticized. What do you want me to do? You know, it just gets very confusing, but I do like what my friend here said. I just focus on the goal and on the good thing, and then eventually people will move with you. But the thing is, even in any environment, you have people who criticize all the time for nothing, just because they don't like how you look. They don't like the fact that you are better even than them. But there is also another group of male colleagues that also support you and so on. So it's a mixed environment. But I tell you, my worst experience, I was very happy about things. It's when I became the chairperson of the department. And guess what? The most opposition came from where? No, I was the only female in engineering, so it was the other chairs. My department, I was able, because you know, women has this...
Because you become a threat.
Yeah. We have a tendency, because I was hit so badly before, you know, as a female, looking always at the wrong things, that people create an environment where we don't talk to each other. So I worked on changing the department environment to something that has, you know, that build the trust between the colleagues, focus on the goal, have a plan and work on it, and make everybody participate in this. So everybody felt they are part of a family, and the department went to another level. But in the administrative committee, the other chairs were nuts, you know. I've been getting all sorts of criticism and curses, if you want, or whatever. But it didn't bother me, because in the administrative council, I'm representing a department. And when you have your group behind you, you're able to take that criticism not on a personal level. But that threat continued, and until somebody else made a mistake. So be patient. Eventually, people will understand that you have value added, and then they will judge you on what you can achieve. It takes people longer time, especially if you have a vision for achieving something. That criticism helps you wanting to prove this to them. And as you mentioned, MIT was really a great place to be at. The whole system supports, you know, the students, the faculty, the environment. The focus is the work, but it just gives you a disease for life. You cannot stop working. You become an alcoholic and workaholic. Sorry. Now but this is the thing.
You know,
but
because it's almost 5 now.
Yeah. But this is what I wanted to say. But keep it up. Patience. Some of our colleagues said this yesterday. And patience. Eventually, you get your status.
Thank you for your comment and feedback. I believe, do we have any other question or comment? تفضلي.
Thank you for giving me the chance.
Sure.
I think the problem where you see we're highly advanced women and really successful in the graduation. When it comes to employment, we are in a less opportunities. We don't know what for. But I feel the reason we can't diagnose the problem, I don't know, it is a psychological, if I may, I don't want to elaborate too much, but I'm thinking always women are labeled, they are the cause of troubles. Even Adam, when he was sent out of heaven, she is the one who made him eat the apple. So why? Is that the true or no? I mean, in the Islamic belief, they say it's not true. Yet, they still follow that the woman is the cause of troubles. Okay.
This is how men use the story against us.
Excuse me?
I said this is how men use the story against us. Yeah?
So, I mean, if we look at the problem, I feel could it be from our side on how we can manage it. But if you look at, okay, Adam came out, the whole world came out from heaven to be troubled here in the earth. Okay. Now, when I look at something like the cock, you know, cuckoo, cuckoo, has red big thing like that, and the poor hen behind him. The peacock spreads his lovely feather, and the poor woman behind him. The lion, he's sitting like that, and she brings him the food. Now, for my pharmacological point of view, I call it the androgenic effect. Androgen is the hormone of the male, which causes all this structure and psychologically affect. So why don't we call it, it's the androgenic hormone. So we have to look for a cause or anti-androgen or find a way to get over that. It needs politics. I disagree to being patient. I want things to be done yesterday and before yesterday. Because الصبر يودي للقبر, this is an Arabic saying. Being patient, it takes you to grave. So why should we wait? I mean, luckily we are enough and we have proved ourselves. But I feel we have a problem, which today Dr. Asarwa mentioned, we don't help each other, networking, can't help it. And again, they say women jealousy. Are we in that case? Let's look at all these bits of pieces and put them together and don't leave this meeting, because I was here, luckily, 10 years ago, the opening of this activity. How much did we do? Still, we are working around ourselves. We don't spread and cooperate. I mean, there are organizations which helping research. Why don't we make them? I mean, there is no border for science, neither geography, nor race, nor religion, nor belief. Let's forget about all of that, and we have target. Believe me, we will be leading the world. Please let us look at things and don't wait until we go to grave. Thank you.
Sure, thank you. I think we are closing with very straightforward message. Yes, I think I totally agree with you. We shouldn't wait more. Maybe we need to be patient, but we shouldn't wait. We should take an action and put a plan and execute properly. Thank you for your attendance, and hopefully, do you have any comment? Yes?
1 second. To be patient to find the result of your research. It needs patience. It doesn't come straight away. But not to be patient, to be pressed, and not being employed, being a woman, and block the way for you. No, this is different types of patience. So thank you. Sorry.
Thank you. Yeah. Gil.
Okay, one of the things that I really find, what if your tip for diversity? So what if you are accepted in a program because they have to fill up the quota for women? So what? Big deal, okay? So don't let that be a bother. Yes, okay, so take it. But do I get to do it? Yes. Wonderful. Do I get accepted in a program just because they have to fill up the quota of a minority? So be it. What's the deal? I'm getting what I want, right?
Our bride. Our bride is the deal. I think
So, see, when you put the
Yes.
ego in the picture,
Yes.
you
But-
lose.
There's another problem, though, which is there's a difference between taking advantage of an opportunity and then when you get punished because people perceive that you're a token, right? So in this case, I was rejected for that grant, right? Because one of the reviewers thought that I wasn't a contributor, even though I wrote 2/3 of it myself. They thought I was just added on by the senior male colleagues. So they reviewed that in a negative light, right? So I agree with you that, you know, sometimes we have to be aspirational. We have to set goals and say we're going to accept a certain number of women in this program to improve diversity, which might mean hiring a woman just because she's a woman. But then then the problem comes if your colleagues treat you differently, they treat you poorly because they think that you haven't earned your position, and that's the sort of dark side of that.
Actually, it will be an issue always. Why? Because keep in mind that everybody has an agenda, a hidden agenda, whether a male or a female, all right? So having that in mind, okay, you can always expect that people who wants to, you know, progress over your achievement or by stepping on you, there will always be in the picture, all right? So knowing that, it's like, shouldn't care, okay? You'll do the best. And for that rejection, okay, I guarantee you that there are people that male got rejected, although they wrote most of the paper, all right? Because for one reason or the other. But the difference between us and the male population or the male scientist, okay, he'll take any opportunity, and it doesn't matter. He might be hired because he's a good-looking professor, okay, and he will attract the female population to sign up in that major, right? Does it make his, you know, does he say, oh, I got accepted because I'm such a good-looking guy? Doesn't matter, really. Damn, he got the job, all right? And I think our attitude about our pride as women and our ego shouldn't be a factor at all. And that's what we need to teach our daughters, okay? This is not an issue. One of the things that I did with my daughter growing up, and I'm sharing this because it's fundamental, right? When she was little, I didn't show her any of the Cinderella movies. No princess movies, okay? Showed her things that more of the little toaster, you know, Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. There were a lot of, the bus, the scientific bus, this thing, okay, thank you. All right, so there were none of them, the female model or role is a little princess waiting for the pure handsome prince on the white horse. Later on, years after that, okay, she was sitting with a group and was like, see, I don't believe in this concept of a princess and a princess is gonna save me, all right? I can do my own career. I build myself, all right? And I looked at her and I said, I think you came up with this. I said, yes. I said, honey, I worked on you since you were little. I made clear that this is not the principle and the concepts that you have in your mind. Grow up to be an independent, strong girl. You stand up for what you believe in, okay, and you go for it. So I think part of it is that we, as I'm going to say an older person here, okay, that my responsibility is to back you up, to strengthen you, okay, and anytime that you feel that just that tiny voice of doubt, that I'm behind you pushing you and say, no, you're fine, whatever it takes, okay? That's it. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks for your attention and for being here with us in this session. Thank you for your presentation. I appreciate your time. Thanks.